All right, good day, and welcome. Part two. Okay, so as I was finishing off in the last, like some of the the long range air to air weapons and stuff like that, air to ground weapons that the Saab Gripen has that are proprietary to Saab. But the fact that the Gripen could pretty much use most NATO munitions, like some stuff they didn't bother adapting for because it's too old. But overall, I think the F-35 has more weapons to its disposal, including nuclear missile B-61s. Uh, those are a glide bomb. But uh, the thing is that it's just they adopted the F-35 so that because there's just so much of an arsenal already existing. So new weapons, yes, Storm Shadow, whatever, ATACMS, same missile, just one's British, one's American. It's joint venture stuff. So yeah, it can do those kind of cruise missile attacks and stuff like that. So the F-35 does have a lethal range and probably has access to more weapons. But that said, if Canada was to take on either of these aircraft, something to consider is that some weapons that we have for the F-18 might not work with the Saab Gripen, right? So would make those weapons effectively obsolete. But however, we still have the F-18s. We don't necessarily have to get rid of them. They'll be the B fighter, right? Like what we used to do, we'd phase out one aircraft and get another one. But while we were phasing out one aircraft, the other craft would be like a second line fighter, not priority, but just sitting there in reserve. And I think that is something to consider, but it's something that, again, just because we buy new aircraft doesn't mean we have to get rid of our old aircraft. Maybe we do, and maybe we sell them off and use that to fund some of the new program. Fine. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is a big one, is that weapons aside, it's availability to the weapons, right? So if we were to take on the Saab Gripen, like for example, it would be in our best interest as a full package to say, okay, well, not only are we, like right now, the deal is kind of a weird deal. Nobody really knows exactly what the new deal is going to be. It's similar to the old deals offered in the past. You have to understand the Swedes have been basically, taking advantage of political turmoil, right? That's what they're doing. So basically, when the fighter competition was started in Canada, it came down to basically, I can't remember if the F-16 was included or not, but I know it came down to four. And that was Saab Gripen, F-35, Super Hornet, and Eurofighter, right? Now, the Eurofighter would be the most powerful of the aircraft, the fastest of the aircraft, probably the most advanced of the aircraft, followed by the Super Hornet, right, which would be more powerful than the other aircraft, whatever. The Saab Gripen is probably the most maneuverable out of all these aircraft in certain overall. We'll just say overall, okay? So again, how often will you get into a dogfight? Well, the Malaysians did a war games against the Chinese with their J-10s, right, which is an Su-27. And the Su-27s, being the powerhouse that they are, we'll call the J-10 the Su-27 because it's essentially what they are, right? The Chinese had the advantage 15 kilometers and in when maneuverability became more of an issue. So the closer they got, those fast climbing super powerhouse aircraft did a little bit better against the Saab Gripens then. But as soon as you got like 15 kilometers or further where it was beyond visual range, the Saab Gripens were cleaning the clocks of the Chinese aircraft in these mock. They were getting more kills. Maybe not completely impervious, but they were getting more kills, right? So because of the technological advance of these aircraft. What we don't know is how well are the Chinese pilots trained versus how well the Malaysian pilots were trained. But we have some data there. It's not real world. It's simulated, right? So it's simulated in the sense that yes, the airplanes are real, they're in the air, but it's mock dogfights. They're not and interceptions. It's not okay. Here's one for the books, right? So for example, F-22, yeah, it's got the balloon kill, right? The F-22 got to kill a balloon. Su-57 got to kill a couple of Ukrainian aircraft. So it's like that. The Saab Gripen, okay, yes, one was shot down either by Pakistan or India. I can't remember which. I think India had the Saab Gripen and it got shot down. Or Pakistan had it and it got shot down in that last little skirmish between India and Pakistan. What I can't tell you is how well those pilots are trained, right? So we can't just go by one issue like that. It's like the MiG-29. MiG-29 has a horrible track record in combat. So many of them have been shot down. But when you start looking at the air forces that got shot down, how good were those air forces? Like how much flying time did these have? How much upgrade did these aircrafts have? Eritrea and Somalia. I forget which one has the one has the Su-27 and one has the MiG-29, right? And what we saw was the MiG-29s got clobbered by these Su-27s, and there was one or two Su-27s that got shot down. But again, we don't know the pilot level, how well they took care of the aircraft, what weapons they were using. We don't know this, you know. And a lot of these other places, like they buy these aircraft and they just keep them running in original configuration. So, you know, is it a Gen 1, a Gen 2? You know what I mean? All that factors in. The Ukraine, again, the Russian pilots were shooting down their Su-27s and pretty much all their MiG-29s early on because the Ukrainians, yes, they had a formidable size air force for the time, but the problem is not well trained enough. They're good. The good Ukrainian pilots were good enough, but they were flying older aircraft that were outdated from 1984, you know? So their top pilots were getting shot down because the Russians had upgraded the same. So Russian Su-27s and Su-35s that were upgraded had an advantage over the, you know, but the pilots were probably equal in skill. It's just, you know, the Su-27s, the radars were getting jammed. When the Su-27 came out, they touted it as a jam-proof radar. And at the time, it probably was. But, you know, things change, right? So we have to consider that. But the political side of it, we really have to consider a lot as well, because if we've already got 1,600 jobs in Canada under the F-35 program, building parts for the F-35 and stuff like that. On a plane, we don't even, you know, maybe we should just be concentrating on F-18 pilots parts for now, right? You know, our planes are grounded waiting for parts. It's like, okay, but we're building parts for brand new airplanes for other people. Yeah. But they're also talking about having an F-35 service station from Bombardier here in Quebec, which means everybody in the world that has F-35s could be, you know, servicing them there. That deal's not a done deal yet, and that could be more jobs for Canadians. But considering how temperamental Donald Trump is, he could pull this deal. My hunch is Donald Trump's going to pull the F-35 deal on Canada and all military procurements at some point, just on a whim. And when he does, that gives us the out. Because at the end of the day, it's not in our interest to buy American equipment right now, when the threat is that the Americans are probably going to go to war with us in the near future for our resources, right? So you have to factor that in. I know it sounds very hyperbolic or whatever. I have a whole reasoning on that. I've got it on my BitChute. I've explained it many times. But, you know, sometimes when you just watch people long enough, you can kind of get the vibe for what they're about. And you got to be able to decipher the rhetoric and whatever. So not to get too hyperbolic on that. But if we bought American aircraft, one of the big political no-nos Donald Trump did to the F-35 was by threatening people who, okay, you don't do this deal, we could shut your actual in-service, and he did it against Spain. I believe it was Spain. The Spain has some F-35s. Basically, or whichever country it was, he said, look, if you don't finish your deal, we could shut those things off in flight. Which I don't think they can actually shut the aircraft off in flight, but they can shut the data link off. And right away, Raytheon had to come out with, no, we're not going to do this to you. So that's really shook up the global market of everybody that was, oh, well, maybe buying these F-35s might not be a good idea, especially when you got somebody so whimsical like Trump in there right now. What happened to the guy, I don't know. He was supposed to be the good guy, right? But the thing is that no matter what you say about Trump, it's controversial whether you support him or you don't support him. I get that, so I won't get into that here. But what is important is that, that's a big one. Look, when the Brits and the Israelis got their F-35s, the Brits said, we'll take the aircraft because it's a better alternative to our Harriers. But here's the deal. We're going to put BAE systems in their system, which is compatible with NATO and all that. And this is very important. Like Canada's already on the IESA radar, what they call it, echelon radar, all that stuff. If they're still using echelon, the whole NATO, everybody in NATO is pretty much their aircraft can communicate with each other, right? But Sweden is just new to NATO, and Saab is not a part of that network. This is huge. So this kind of transcends the abilities of the aircraft, which I think either aircraft is fine. But the one thing is that, and this is very crucial, is if you're in joint combat operations, your aircraft have to be able to, communicate with the warships, the ground control, the other aircraft, all that stuff, the AWACS and all that. So Sweden is kind of proprietary. It's on its own. So the problem is there, that would be a major setback for Canada if we have to have two systems, right? It means more expensive. But we might be, if the switch can be flicked that we don't receive data, that's a major, we need reliability in our partner. And right now, the United States is not a reliable partner. It's a very volatile partner that's slightly hostile to us and even threatening us, right? So a lot of people will just dismiss the threats, but, when you think about it, when the United States threatens war with you, considering all the countries that they've done regime change in, and are about to do more in, you might want to take that seriously, even if it sounds like it's just a joke at first, right? The way the U.S. works is they take a while to propagandize the population to get them to hate whichever country they're about to attack, right? Oh, they're terrorists, weapons of mass destruction, the drug dealers, whatever. These are the bad people. We got to go get them. And it takes a while to. The Canadians are screwing us over. They're hard to deal with. They're screwing us over. We're paying for everything that they got. I digress. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be good. You just have to sell the propaganda. It doesn't have to be true. But it is something that you have to take serious, right? So having another U.S.-made aircraft and just going on the idea, well, we've had such a great relationship for so long, and it just got thrown under the bus when it really didn't need to. Well, should we not take the threat seriously, and maybe we need to move towards a new system, even if we're going to lose 1,600 jobs and some potential business in the future, we might be able to make that up somewhere else, right? So Saab is saying they're going to give us 10,000 jobs. Everybody's saying there's no world in which that is possible. But there's people for it, there's people against it. There would be, when the fighter competition came in, most people said, we got F-18 Hornets. Well, the Super Hornet looks like almost identical. Let's just buy Super Hornets. It's just the evolution of the Hornet. It'll be easy to train the guys up for whatever the changes are. But I don't know how much commonality there is between the Super Hornet and the actual Hornet. Other than in style and shape, I think everything on that airplane is pretty much new. However, the airplane kind of died off early where the Navy lost out to the F-35. So there's only like 50 of them out there. People go on about how, well, yeah, but there's not much of a network because the Swedes have only built 300 Saab Gripens. Yeah, but there's only 600 F-35s. You know what I mean? There's going to be more of each aircraft. So, I think in the future, the main fighters you're going to see, Russian fighters aside, is people are either going to be buying Dassault Rafales, okay? Basically, the French are building those, and they can't sell them fast enough, and they can't keep up the production. The next one's going to be the Saab Gripen, and then the F-35. These are going to be the maybe the Eurofighter might still be in the ring. I don't know, but it seems like that's the way the world is going to work. The nations with a little bit less money are probably going to just go for the Gripen. But I don't think they're getting less airplane for the money. In fact, I think they're getting a lot more airplane for the money because it's cheaper to run, cheaper to buy. And the thing is like, okay, if the airplanes have to go into contested airspace, there's no denying that having the stealth is an advantage, right? If the F-35 is working 100% as advertised, it has a bit of an advantage there. If the Saab Gripen is going into contested airspace, and the same contested airspace, we're talking like S-300s, S-400, S-500, S-550 missile systems, S-600s, when they come out, and the 700s when they come out, the best air defense systems in the world. The Saab Gripen is probably got some disadvantages, but is no more, in my opinion, no more vulnerable or advantageous to the F-35. It's really going to come down to the tactics to survive that, because the stealth can be detected 100 miles out, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so you detect the Saab Gripen 120 miles out. You know what I mean? It's an advantage. Don't get me wrong. It's an advantage, but the Chinese are very, very heavy on, figuring out how to detect stealth. Hence why their aircraft, which we might see some of the Chinese aircraft out there, like the J-20s and stuff like that, and maybe the J-36s, which the J-36, it's a freaking cool airplane. Like the Chinese have really, really, they're outpacing the F-35s in production. They're building about 120 of those. That's like 10 a month. You know what I mean? That's a production rate. Even the Russians aren't quite up there with the F-35, Su-35s, and definitely nowhere near that with the Su-57s. But the Su-57s, it's not about the high production rate of those things, because they're going into version 2 with the with the flat nozzles now. The Russians, they don't do like the Americans, go all in on one fighter. What they do is they build a couple of them, they run them for a couple of years, and then they say, okay, well, here's version 2, here's M3, M4 version, M5 version, whatever. And then it's like, okay, by the time we do all these upgrades, it's going to be a totally new aircraft. So Su-27 turns into the Su-30, Su-34, Su-33 for the naval variant. And then, okay, well, we got those. How about we take it up a notch? Okay, Su-37 comes in. Okay, this is as good as the Su-27 line can get. Okay, well, now we'll call it the Su-35. Tweak it a bit more over the Su-37. They went up one and came back two. Or they went up two and they came back two. And then they like the Su-34 so much that they're just, okay, like batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4, right? And they got about 200 and some of those now. Maybe a little bit more, because they're still building them. And the Su-35, well, they love those because, again, it's a very high capability aircraft, and they're building them fairly fast. And the Su-30s are a good backbone aircraft too. It does all the technical stuff similar to the Su-34, but not quite to the same level. It's a little bit more of a true multi-role all-around aircraft, where the Su-35 is more of the hot rod interceptor, and the Su-34 is the fighter bomber, right? But they're all derivative of the same aircraft. But the Americans don't do that, where the Russians kind of like just, they don't reinvent the wheel, they refine it. Eventually you're going to see the Su-57s and the Su-75s that they're starting to work on now. So you might see a prototype of the Su-75 next year, which is, I guess, going to be the replacement for, like, it's going to become a backbone aircraft. It'd be like the replacement for the Su-27s and the old aircraft like that, and the MiG-29s, and cheaper to run because of a single engine. So it's kind of like going to be a competitor to the F-35, but those are still not, like they're not on the market yet. Like they're still in design. So the thing is Canada could like say, okay, well, why would we go for if we wanted real capabilities, let's just go to the Eurofighter, because we were doing the same thing for the Eurofighter. We were servicing them and upgrading them here in Canada for the new batch. I thought we were actually building them at one point. And I'm like, well, if we're building right now, if we were building the Eurofighters, it would be a no-brainer. Well, the assembly lines are already there. Let's just let's just kind of like make a couple for our own. So we'll build 10 for everybody else, and for every 10 we get one free one for ourselves, and maybe over a year or two we get a 50 or 60 of them or whatever. You know what I mean? But Carney doesn't want to have a mixed fleet. And I understand this commonality. The idea goes back to the Cold War, where the Russians had kind of come up with the idea for themselves after World War II, rather than having a whole bunch of different types of vehicles, make all your tracked vehicles use the same tracks and same pulleys, or bogie wheels and stuff like that, so that there's all same hydraulic pumps on every aircraft, all that stuff. They tried to do that with the MiG-21, where but what happened was different factories were doing slightly different specs, so it didn't work out well. But the concept was right? Where just commonality. The Americans started doing that, but they built so much different stuff that everything's proprietary. So, like sometimes it makes commonality a hard thing. The Germans, I think they got it right. The Swedes definitely got it right with the CV90. So every CV90 has the same track, it has the same bogey wheels, same hydraulic pumps. So basically you train one mechanic, he could service 11 different type of vehicles, because they're really not that much different mechanically. Well, it comes down to the same thing with the Gripen. You know what I mean? Simplicity is key. And this is where, okay, so I talked about contested airspace, that the F-35 might have a bit of an advantage, right? But if it was like World War III, okay, and you're being bombed daily, kind of like the way the Ukrainians are right now, I think the Saab Gripen would mop the floor with the F-35, just in the fact that it could stay in the air a lot longer. Because after about a month or two, what do you see? Why don't we see the Ukrainian Air Force flying? Well, most of the aircraft got destroyed, right? Not in the air, on the ground, waiting for maintenance, right? Maintenance is the World War III Air Force killer. Now, aircraft that takes 20 to 30 hours of routine maintenance for every hour flown, which is the F-35, okay, because they're so hard to maintain. Like I say, on the aircraft carriers, you got to basically repaint these airplanes every now and then, because that coating, that stealth coating, if it's not on there, your aircraft becomes much less stealthier. But the problem is you can actually look at like Navy versions of the F-35, and it looks like rust on them, and it's because the paint's corrosive, right? So without that coating, you got to maintain that. So it's not that durable. Now, you could say that for any aircraft, because almost all aircraft now use more stealthier coatings. But the thing is, it is added cost, and a lot of air forces are using more durable coatings, right? So that it's like, okay, it might not be as stealthy, but it's a flat color, so it doesn't reflect as well, but it's more durable. Okay, so just like little things like that add up. Now you add all the other regular maintenance, okay, it just, yeah, the airplane that makes the most sense are two. It's MiG-21 for low maintenance, because the MiG-21, okay, yeah, it's an old airplane, but when a North Korean pilot defected to the States, they tested the airplane. The Americans flew it for 100 hours, and the only thing they had to replace was a fuel pump, because the airplanes are just so easy, right? But problem with the MiG-21 is it would never survive anything. The Saudis, I believe it was the Saudis or the UAE back in the 90s, they had a MiG-21 upgrade program where they basically digitized the cockpit. Yeah, it's just they didn't do very many of them, but it was a step in the right direction for the MiG-21, because it was a cheap alternative for a really low maintenance fighter jet and to give it a better radar and all that, make it sort of capable. Um, it was a great idea. It worked. But what it really did is saying that what I would say is that what it taught us is that a simple aircraft that a third world countries can fly, maybe not the UAE is not technically it. Well, it's a sort of a third world country, sort of. It's have and have nots, right? But like you take the Syrians, okay, flying MiG 23s, Su 22s, and MiG 21s, stuff like that, and MiG. I don't know if they had any MiG 25s or Su 25s. I think, yeah, they did have some Su 25s. They can keep these things running with paper clips and shoestrings, right? It's just they're not very technologically advanced. So the thing is that if a third world country can keep those running, okay, it shows you the concept that in elongated war, your airplanes are going to be your sophisticated airplanes like MiG 21s, MiG 29s, Su 30s, and stuff like that are going to be really high maintenance. This is what the Su 27s, F 15s, F 18s, F 16s make sense because for every 1 hour flown, 3 to 4 hours of routine maintenance, much less than your F 35, right? So the only airplane I see after 6 months of World War III in the United States still flying is probably going to be F 16s because they're the only thing that's going to be easy enough to maintain, and that's going to be hard enough as it is. The Saab Gripen is slightly more expensive to buy than the new F-16 Viper, which I'm a big fan of the F-16. If you're going to have a non-stealth single-engine aircraft, I mean, if you've ever seen an F-16 fly, it's like, yeah, they're great airplanes. If you ever sat in one, they're fat. Yeah, like the F-16 is so, it's overrated in some areas, but it's underrated most of all. Like, yeah. But the F-35s are the priority over the F-16 Vipers and stuff because it's like, what? You're not stealth, right? So, okay, they need to make a stealthy F-16 is what they need to do. And the thing is that the Saab Gripen is a little more expensive to buy. I think at last count I saw $48 million in aircraft, which is about half the price of the F-35. But we don't even know the actual price of the F-35. They could be $200 million in aircraft, like the F-22s. I'm hearing something like 96 million per aircraft. It depends how many you buy, whatever. So the less you buy, the higher the price, right? The more you buy, the lower the price. But a MiG-29, the newest MiG-29s come in at 50 million. You know what I mean? And nobody's buying those anymore. Not even the MiG-35, which is the ultimate version of the MiG-29, because it's like the track record's not good. But I think that has more to do with pilot training and the variant and, what they're flying up against. If you put them against, period correct aircraft, I think in the hands of a good pilot, like if you had the Polish pilots were probably as good as or better than the Ukrainian pilots, MiG-29 pilots, and the German pilots, which the Germans haven't flown those MiG-29s in years. But the German MiG-29 pilots were probably the best MiG-29 pilots next to the Russians, because during the Cold War, the Eastern Bloc, the Luftwaffe has always been a good air force. We'll just say that. The Germans have more aerial kills than any other nation combined, including the United States. Like they've just got more aerial kills than anybody else. Even though they lost World War II, we won't get into that. But yeah, but they've never lost that heritage of pilot perfection. You know what I mean? Even with all the problems that the Luftwaffe is facing, every nation is facing that right now. So yeah, the Luftwaffe, they can't keep all their Typhoons flying because they're too expensive. They're not getting enough hours on them. But their pilot training is second to none. It's as good as the American pilots, good as the Canadian pilots, good as any NATO pilot is pretty much on par. I know everybody, the American pilots are so much better. No, they're not. They're not necessarily better. They're better than air forces that don't fly as much, but the actual training is the same amongst NATO. So there's different ways they do it, but different doctrines and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, no, the Americans, their training regime is the same as everybody else's. It just comes down to who gets more flying hours. The Americans do have like fighter pilot, what do you call it, Top Gun stuff, right? And that lot of air forces don't have the top like a natural Top Gun school. Canada, we have a Top Gun school as well, and we use Alpha Jets and Skyhawks to teach pilots how to, from around the world, how to basically dogfight, right? So we have that too. It's just when you get into the RCAF, they don't really have a Top Gun school per se. They go to this place in Laval and they go there, or Bagotsville and places like that. They go there. Or Cold Lake in Alberta. That's where your pilots are going to get the hot shot pilots are going to go, right? So Cold Lake, Alberta is probably the biggest where they go. But anyway, yeah. So all these pilots it's about the training. So the Saab pilots are obviously going to be the ones training us if we get that. The American pilots would be the ones that are going to be training us on the F-35. Here's how you maintain it, whatever. We're going to send over some exchange ground crews, whatever, for say 2 years or whatever, just to get your guys going. But the thing is this is why the F-16s haven't worked in the Ukraine the way people thought it would. They got about 150 F-16s, but they're probably older batch F-16s. And the Ukrainians are still probably trying to figure out how to freaking repair these things and maintain these things, right? Because you don't learn that overnight. So what's probably happening is most of the airplanes are going into Poland, okay? And again, it takes years to transition your military to a new air force. Now, the way we used to do it in Canada was we had multiple fleets, one, so the new fleet could play catch up. And then once it caught up, then you could ditch the old fleet, right? So we had basically those 4 airplanes. Again, the French airplanes, the Mirage 2000s, which the Mirage 2000 would be an excellent airplane for Canada, I think. And the Rafales, which would be an excellent airplane for Canada as well, if we wanted a twin engine. They weren't, France was not a part of the Five Eyes, therefore they couldn't compete in this fighter competition. Now, the Eurofighter was deemed too expensive to run. It would be probably on par to run as the F-35 with a slightly more versatile aircraft to the F-35 in a lot of ways, and definitely way higher performance. So if you've got, let's go back to that scenario I gave between the F-35 and the Saab Gripen having to change down an Su-34 murder duck with a nuke in its belly, and coming over the Canadian Arctic. Well, I guarantee you that murder duck is going to get its neck wrung if you have a Eurofighter Typhoon, because the Eurofighter Typhoon can supercruise as well, and it's got more power than the Su-34. It's lighter, it's fast, it carries 10 weapons, long-range weapons as well, the Meteor missile as well, and it can run at Mach 2.5 like an F-15 or whatever. You're not outrunning that thing. The last thing you want on your tail is a Eurofighter Typhoon. That is a phenomenal, not a good aircraft, not a great aircraft. It's a phenomenal aircraft. The track record, it hasn't really, the thing is all these aircraft haven't really seen frontline combat, right? To the degree where it's like F-15s have never really been challenged to the degree where it's like, okay, we're now up against some really good pilots in some really capable, counterpart airplanes that, okay, who's going to win? It's no longer, okay, like when you're setting up a bunch of highly trained 1,500-hour F-15 pilots with upgrades against a first-generation MiG-29 Iraqi pilot, with like 40 hours of flying time. Yeah, who's going to win? Who do you think you're going to put your money on? That said, even the Iraqi pilots, with being underdogs in the Desert Storm, MiG-29 Iraqi pilots, one Iraqi pilot did get a kill. I don't remember if it was an F-18 or an F-16 or whatever he shot down, but he shot down something, right? And other Iraqi pilots have actually done well against, like, say, the Iran-Iraq War. The Iraqi Mirage, the Mirage, F1s. They fucking did great with those things because they were against like similar technology, and their pilots were actually better than the Iranian pilots at the time. The Syrian pilots in their MiG and the Egyptian pilots in their MiG 21s, they did really they did better against the Israelis. It's just we have the belief that the Israelis were invincible. They did win the war, but they took higher losses because the Iraqi pilots the Syrian pilots and the Egyptian pilots were slightly better. Don't get me wrong, the IDF had better airplanes. They ended up with the F4 Phantom and stuff like that, and that was the game changer they had, and they did well with those. Otherwise, no, the Syrian pilots and the Egyptian pilots were actually kind of better because the equipment was close enough. It's just the Israelis just magically came out on top because of getting better equipment, right? Vietnam, the state-of-the-art F4 Phantoms up against MiG-15s and MiG-21s and stuff like that, and Su-22s and what have you, MiG-19s. Yeah, the F4 Phantoms, yeah, because the F4 Phantom is so technologically advanced, it will detect and kill an enemy long before it can see it beyond visual range. But when the enemy decides to play sneaky and turn off their identifier chip, it's like, okay, you detected something on radar. What is it? Is it an airliner? You can't just shoot it down. You got to get close to see it. Oh, shit, we're perched in the sky. We got a dogfight. Oh, what do you mean the F4 Phantom has no fucking gun and the missiles only have a 12% chance of hitting? Gee, why did we lose so many F4 Phantom pilots? F4 Phantom pilots were told, no, don't try to do whirly dogfights with this big, heavy 54,000-pound airplane because you'll crash it. Then they later learned that, rendezvous at 25,000, we need to fucking learn how to dogfight. Once you put a 20-millimeter cannon on the F4 Phantom, and suddenly the tides turned, right? But the Phantoms were getting shot down by like these $40 million aircrafts were getting shot down by these $4 million MiG-21s, right? And what was it? It was probably, well, it comes out now, it wasn't North Korean pilots per se. There was a few North Korean pilots. It was mainly Russian pilots flying under the North Korean banner. Kind of like what you're seeing with the F-16s. It's probably mostly mercenary American pilots flying over the Ukraine. So the thing is that because you can't just switch a fleet overnight. Now, Canada, okay, everybody was at the time during the fighter competition, just go for the Super Hornet. It's a no-brainer. It's probably not as capable as the Eurofighter Typhoon in performance, but close enough. And it's faster. We know the legacy. The Super Hornet has been a very good aircraft. Not without its teething problems, but it was a refined F-18. So the lessons learned from the F-18 translate. So what they did to make it say, okay, well, we're going to take this Navy airplane, we're going to make it stealthier. And they tried to sell you the Super Hornet as a stealth aircraft. Yeah, well, we made square intakes, guys. It's stealth now. It's like 25% stealthier. Yeah, so you mean it's a 737 instead of a 747 on radar. Okay, fine. But they added 25% more wing area. Total new radars. Radar jamming with the Growler model. The Americans are still flying the Growler models because it's kind of like it does what maybe not to the same level, but it was similar to the A6 Intruder and Prowler, which I thought were phenomenal aircraft for the Americans. You want to jam a radar, that's the way to do it. Like if they made a stealthy version of and the F-35 kind of makes me think of the A6 Intruder and stuff like that, because it is designed to do radar jamming and stuff like that. But so is the Saab Gripen, right? It uses its missile evasion techniques and stuff like that by jamming radars and stuff like that, and so it has a lot of emphasis on that. So the Americans have that in the F-35. But they're more relying on the stealth, where the Saab Gripen is more relying on electronic warfare. right? So everybody's like, okay, no, well, let's just get the Super Hornet. But then we find out the Super Hornet is not identical. It looks almost identical to the F-18 to the point where the novice can't tell. Like in the air, you wouldn't, at a distance, you wouldn't be able to tell which one you were looking at. You'd only know you're looking at some sort of an F-18 just by the wing profile and the tail and stuff like that, the shape of it. But at the end of the day, it's if the Su-57 can be classified as the best 4.5 generation aircraft ever built, right behind that is going to be Eurofighter and Super Hornet, right? Those are kind of the best overall multi-role fighters. I say, no, well, what about the F-15? Well, the F-15 Eagle is, Strike Eagle is a multi-role aircraft, but at the end of the day, it's just a fancy interceptor that has been converted to it's an afterthought, right? Because the F-15 was an air superiority machine. It was never designed to be the ground strike fighter that they made it into. That's the problem with the F-14. It was like it was meant to go up really high, get those bombers and whatever, do multi-role missions, but it's not the best at it. The F-18 was a better aircraft. It might not have had the same performance, but it was designed as a true multi-role aircraft. The same way the F-35 is. It's like the F-22. They try to adapt it as a multi-role fighter, and you find out that it doesn't really work well, and it'll do the job, but you compromise the concept of the aircraft because in order to make it a multi-role fighter, you have to have ground targeting pods, stuff like that, the IR pods, all that stuff. And the problem is that stuff hangs off the aircraft, which compromises your stealth. Where the F-35 has it integrated where it has an internal pod, and it just comes out as a little camera in the front of the nose, and it can target and all that. It still remains fairly stealthy, maybe a little more detectable, but it can do the job and then clean itself up and become stealthy again. This is what happened to the F-117. The F-117 over Serbia, when it got shot down, which again, a stealthier aircraft in comparison to the F-35, what happened was the aircraft itself, was hard to detect. The Serbians knew it was in the area because they detect the AWAC, they would detect the F-16s and whatever, the escort, whatever, and they knew wherever this escort was, somewhere around it in the area was going to be an F-117. So they finally figured out where the flight path was and whatever. And they figured out other things like when it would open its bomb bay doors, suddenly you could detect it, but you only had a few seconds to detect it and figure out certain things. So it took them 3 nights to figure it out. 3 nights to figure it out with an old Soviet-era S-200 missile system. Old, right? So again, the stealthiest aircraft probably ever built, way stealthier than probably the F-35. Comes in, night 1, night 2, night 3. The guy drops his payload. They find the hole in the sky. They're tracking him already. He opens up his bomb bay doors. They hone in a bit more, and then all of a sudden, on his way back, the guy's, wait a minute. One thing about the F-117, it didn't have any countermeasures to avoid detection, right? It just had one targeting pod, built in the nose, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, it's a pretty basic airplane. It's just, so it didn't really have all the proper countermeasures that it would need. And missile 1, missile 2, and bam, he gets hit. And he was in stealth mode when he got hit. Like he'd already cleaned up, they closed the bomb bay doors and all that and was heading back. But the way they shot it down is they looked for the heat signature and the cold spot right in front of it, what they call the hole in the sky, and they aimed the missile in front of the heat signature. And that's how they guided it that way, because the way the old Soviet systems was, you fire your missile and you guided the missile to the target, and then you turned on the seeker warhead when it got within range, right? And at that point, well, it locked on and boom, there goes the, again, stealth is only good at a distance. You get too close, you'll detect it with anything. Now, radars have improved a million times fold, so to speak, since the S-200 system. So the F-35, again, the Iranians, they've tracked them many times. They haven't shot them down because they don't want to escalate. The B-2, they've tracked it. They knew they were coming in. They knew where they were coming in and when they were coming in. They just chose not. They chose to allow that those Moabs. They allowed them to get dropped. Everybody's like, oh well, there's nothing they could do about it to stop those aircraft. So if you could stop a B-2 and you could stop, an F-117, again, the F-35 is not that advantage that you think. So would the Super Hornet have been a better option than the F-35? My hunch says yes, it would be. Obviously, because the engine performance, better range, even better weapons load, stuff like that. Maintenance would be about the same. So we wouldn't gain in it, but top end speed, so interception, it would be better. So you're not just solely relying on the missiles to catch your target, right? So the Super Hornet, other problems was that there was only like 50 of them ever built or something. I don't know what they're up to now, but they pretty much halted all production in favor of F-35. So it wasn't a platform that would be easy to keep running unless we went completely, build out, making all the parts here. We have a hard enough time keeping out of the 12 or 1600 F-18s that were built in the world. We fly them. The States fly them, obviously. They still have quite a few of them, but they're getting replaced by the F-35s, right? But the thing is that Finland has some handful of them. Germany has a handful. A few. I think the Israelis have a handful of F-18s. So these F-18s are now getting phased out of the United States, right? And we know what happens when they do. It's like, okay, well, we're going to make parts for maybe about another 10 years, but once we're done with them, then it's, you got to build your own parts, or these airplanes are just going to sit there on the ground, right? So the Super Hornet was out, I think, and the Eurofighter was out because the cost of the Eurofighter and stuff like that. But the Eurofighter is one hell of an airplane, and Canada doesn't really need a Navy airplane. That's like I always thought when we built these things. Well, whether we built them or completed them, I don't know. I was always under the impression we built these things out of Alberta. But I might be wrong. I'm sure if somebody knows, they'll let me know. But I think what the deal was the Americans built the airframes and everything like that, and we just kind of finished them up here. And the thing is, but if we did build them, I was always like, well, why not just get the assembly line for the F-18? The best airplane to replace the F-18, okay, is a modern version of the F-18. That's it. So, okay, well, rather than building a Navy airplane, okay, well, just never mind the folding wings. I know they're a bit, you can get more airplanes in a hangar or whatever, but let's ditch that for cost and make the airplane lighter, stronger. Add that extra 25% wing area for better low-speed handling and all that stuff for dogfighting, and more, wing loading for heavier weapons. We don't really need to have more powerful engines. It's good enough. Just better engine technology. Like a lot of people don't realize how advanced the actual CF-18s are, because ours are a little different from the Americans, because ours had to do everything, right? But the thing is that we could add a lot of F-35 or Saab style stuff to a new version of the F-18. But that's if we could get the old assembly line going. You know what I mean? Might take a year or two, but we could have new F-18s right away. And not only that, build every single ounce of it in the country, including the replacement parts and the weaponry. It's going to take us 5 years to be able to do that. But it would be the easiest thing, because then F-18 2.0 could be a little bit better than the originals. Could incorporate slightly stealthier features, and then F-18 3.0 could be completely 6th gen. You know what I mean? Maybe 10 years down the road. But I digress. So anyway, the thing is that the Super Hornet was out due to cost, and availability of parts was good into question. Eurofighter was out due to basically just cost, just because, do we really need a super fighter? Because, the cost, to run them would be about the same price as the F-35, and the F-35 had the stealth and whatever, and it was American, right beside us, our best friends and allies that love us so much. Not so much now, but anyway. Yeah, so the Eurofighter was ousted, even though it was, in my opinion, the best out of all the four aircraft overall. Performance, versatility, whatever. Where it was down, the down was cost and of maintenance and the maintenance itself. Uh, and the fact that it wasn't stealth, right? And you know, maneuverability. Like I think for maneuverability, the Super Hornet would be slightly more maneuverable, but the thing about the Typhoon is the performance of the engines. I mean, that thing can get off the ground in 5 seconds. That's pretty crazy. From brakes release to wheels up is 5 seconds. That's I don't think any other aircraft seems to do that. So that tells you the kind of powerhouse that thing is. And it could dogfight at above Mach 1. Like it's very few aircraft can do that. Not even the Su-27s can do that. So basically, the Eurofighter's like almost right beside the F-22 in performance, slightly lagging, right? But way more versatile than the F-22. But again, too expensive to run. All that. So it comes down to the two reigning last men standing is the Saab Gripen and the F-35 in this fighter competition. And then the F-35 gets canceled, and then everything's in limbo. Saab comes back with another, a couple of years ago, they come back with another proposal, say, hey, well, we'll give you 3,000 jobs or 6,000 jobs in your country, and we'll sweeten the deal with this. So Donald Trump wins the election this year. Okay, we've already got pending a deal with the F-35. It's Trudeau had canceled it the second time. We got sued on that. Then it was on again under Trudeau. So the guy cancels it and then brings it back because there's no other alternatives, so to speak. The Canadian Air Force is saying, no, the only airplane we could ever have, we won't get good recruitment unless we have this awesome airplane. And that's the F-35. We have to have the F-35. Nothing else will do the job like the F-35. And some of that comes from pilots that flown it. Is that into comparison to everything else? But I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the supply chain has a lot to do with it. The satellite links, that, and then the political, right? And then of course you got to think of, if you had to fight 100-day war, which airplane is going to be in the sky more? If you can't keep F-18s, at full capacity in peacetime, how are you going to keep a 30-hour per every hour, 20 to 30 hour per every hour flown maintenance aircraft in the air in World War III? That's why, it's a really bad aircraft. It's too complicated to work for that kind of thing. But that said, why not have a mixed fleet? Well, Carney doesn't want a mixed fleet, although I believe that would be the best. But I think Carney has other plans with like trade deals around the world. Say, okay, well, maybe we can get, say, 5,000 jobs, even if we lose 1,600 with the F-35, but maybe we can maintain both. But I don't think Trump would allow us to maintain both. The U.S. would say, no, you bought a different aircraft, therefore we're going to cancel all your military procurements with us, which might be to our favor, even though it would be disastrous in the beginning. And of course, there'd be a political nightmare. Could even force another. Look, the F-35 has been an election issue twice, right? So you got to factor that in, right? It is a bit of a white elephant, that thing. And again, the question is our sovereignty is at the whim of Raytheon flicking a switch at the behest of Trump, saying, hey, no, we're going to go to war with the Canadians, or we don't like their trade policy, therefore, yeah, cut the data links. So we have like a $96 billion paperweight sitting on the ground. You know what I mean? But we've got the deal signed for 16 of them. Will we ever get them? Probably not. By the time, the argument against the Gripen is they're like, well, if we have to have the Gripen for the next 40, to 2040s, it's already obsolete now, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, yeah, but it is and it isn't. You know what I mean? Because if we look at the Ukrainian war, what it's telling me is the airplane that's easiest to maintain, has the longest range, and is the most versatile and most practical is the airplane that fights the war for you, not the whiz bang, got every little, those fight the specialty missions for you. And I'm talking about the Su-34. I'm not saying the Su-34 is the plane for Canada, but if there was a fighter bomber design out there that works really well for like a medium fighter bomber, it's the Su-34. It's proving itself better than the Su-24, obviously, that legacy airplane that it's replacing, and the Su-25s. It's way more advanced than those airplanes, even though the Su-25 is the Russians still, out of the 6,500 of them, still have about 1,000 left with upgrades. But those upgrades aren't enough. Like, it gives them targeting pods and all that, but it can't do the long range stuff. Like the Su-25 is like an A-10. They're obsolete in the fact that they only work against like people that don't have air defense systems and stuff like that. No, you need to be able to fire missiles from like 300 miles away. The missile has to do the job now. So it's less about the aircraft. Even if the aircraft is stealthy or not stealthy, it's more of the range of the aircraft, right? And long range aircraft, high capabilities make more sense. That said, another thing to consider, and this is important as well, is that with a mixed fleet, okay, we used to do that. Carney says he doesn't want to do that, but I'm like, okay, it's too hard, it's too complicated. Okay, let's talk about Canada during the Cold War. Okay, so Canada designs the CF-100 Canuck. We built about nearly 700 of those. It was just shy of 700, right? Because that's what it took to defend Canada. And on the backbone of that, we had 1,800 F-36 Sabres. I don't know how many we had left in stock, when these things were out. But the CF-100 was the 2,000-mile range on internal fuel, all weather, while F-86 Sabres were sitting on the ground in Eastern Europe, or in Europe during the Cold War. The CF-100s were the most advanced all-weather airplane built at the time, interceptor at the time, and they were up at 50,000 feet, flying through fog and clouds and whatever, because they could do it, right? Because they were an all-weather aircraft even back then. So Canada had the world's most advanced interceptor at the time. The downside was it was a straight-wing interceptor, which, okay, the straight wing gave us the 2,000-mile range, but what it took from us was above Mach 1 speed. So when the Russians decided to say, we're going to make really fast bomber, goes 1,000 miles per hour. We're like, shit, we need a new fighter, right? It's like, you bastards. Like the Tupolev Bear, that was fine. We could catch it. We could outrun it by about 50 miles an hour, no problem. But the Tu-22, backfires. Those things were fucking fast. Even the early versions of them, right? They were the Tu-22Ms were like, those things are still really fast, right? They're scary. The Russians aren't using them as much either. Like they used them in Syria and stuff like that. The Russians have really said, okay, look, the White Swan, the Tu-160 is a phenomenal feat of engineering and stuff like that, but it's not practical in warfare other than intercontinental missile delivery, right? Same with the MiG-31. It's meant to go across the pond, hit us, and then go back, or across the Arctic, hit us and come back. The Tu-22, not practical. Frogfoot, practical to fly, practical to maintain, but not capable enough. Su-24, good at buzzing modern warships and stuff like that, but again, not survivable enough, not practical enough. Su-34 replaces all those airplanes per se in capability, and it's practical, it's modern enough to thinking, like, let's put it to you this way. The Su-24, if it would have been fired on with the Patriot missile system or the Frogfoot, they would not have been able to, those pilots would have almost no chance they would have gotten away from the Patriot system, right? The Tu-22 and Tu-160s would not be able to outmaneuver the Patriot missile system that was fired. But the Su-34 can, and it did, right? Maybe not all the time, but it was survivable because it was a maneuverable fighter-like maneuverability in a medium fighter bomber that had all the capabilities of the Su-24 and more, and the Su-25 and more, and okay, doesn't have the payload of the Tu-160 or the Tu-22, but big heavy bombers might be going the way of the Dodo because everything can fly circles around them, and they're only good if you can fire your missile 1,000 miles out, right? You can't fly your bombers over targets anymore. Okay, the B-2s can because nobody's willing to escalate and shoot at them. But the second you say, you know what, we're going to shoot down the next B-2 that tries to bomb us, i.e. Iran, those B-2s are going to be gone. That's going to be it. There's no more B-2s. This is why the B-21 Raiders coming in and stuff like that. God knows how many of those there'll be because God knows what those things cost per, Yeah. But the Americans with the stealth, they're all in on it, right? They're going all in on it. But what we're finding in the battlefield that your standoff capability is more important than your stealth, right? And Saab Gripen kind of, it's not the underdog people make it out to be. There is areas like, for example, in a dogfight against a super fighter, like a Eurofighter Typhoon, a Super Hornet, maybe even possibly the F-35, even though the Saab Gripen is faster, the better pilot's going to win, right? Against the Su-57, against the Su-35, these are super fighters. Again, but that said, the Saab Gripen can handle them all in a dogfight. It's at a slight disadvantage. But the thing is you have to get close enough to it to do that. That said, when you listen to the Su-34 pilot outrunning that Patriot missile system, the Saab Gripen pilot would have a much easier time than that poor bastard. Like, they broke that airplane trying to evade that missile. Parts were flying off the airplane because they were, at Mach 2 trying to maneuver something that big, 67,000-pound aircraft with a Patriot missile on its tail. It's quite the footage to listen to. Like, the guy, you could tell the guy pissed his pants and shit his pants many times. So imagine being in that. So how did the Su-34 outrun the missile? Well, it did use electronic warfare and countermeasures, but to be honest with you, the Saab Gripen is more advanced than that aircraft. So it would have an easier time, and being lighter and more maneuverable, way more maneuverable, especially at low speeds, you could probably really outturn the Patriot missile system, you know what I mean? Or any other air defense system. Now, a Patriot missile is not the best missile to fire at an aircraft. It's meant for shooting down other missiles. Had that been an ADAX or something like that, maybe it'd be, a more agile missile. It might not be the same, the same story, but, I digress. But the point I'm using is a point of comparison. So long-term, World War III, I think the Swedes, they're more like light over might, use brain over brawn kind of approach, it is the underdog, but I do believe it is the correct way to go for Canada, because long term though. But the thing is that to survive the political fallout of losing 1,600 jobs and possibly every new military procurement from the United States, well, Carney's already kind of getting out ahead of this with all this mineral deals and stuff like Carney has been doing all kind. And again, I know I don't like the man, but I'm not giving him a rating endorsement. I know everybody gets angry when it makes it sound like I am, but I'm just telling you what he's doing. So this man is trying to, get trade deal after trade deal after trade deal going to offset us from, basically the U.S. economy, because the United States could wipe out our economy, as an act of aggression. And with the 51st state stuff there, that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants to take over Canada. He hates Canadians, but he wants to take over Canada, right? So the thing is that for our resources, and again, just listen to how the man talks about it, so you can tell. He's like, oh, no, it'll be a good deal. It'll be a good deal. But it's no fair that you have a border where we don't like it, and it's no fair that you can control your own waterways, et cetera, et cetera. We're paying for your military, even though every dollar that's spent on the Canadian military, 70 to 80 cents of it goes to the Americans, but apparently we're screwing them over, right? Yeah, Sweden is coming in. They send in their royals and their first minister, which typical pretty blonde Swedish woman, right? So, okay, and they're there like, look, we're not going to bully you. We're going to be friends. Here's the deal. Now the Swedes, okay, they're just taking advantage of a political situation. I don't blame them for this at all. So again, they're not. They're everybody thinks this Saab Gripen deal is a new deal. No, the Swedes have been trying to hit us up for the Saab Gripen since they built them. You know what I mean? They're at everybody. Like the Swedes are after everybody. Say, hey, look, here's an alternative. Like we're a great alternative. Like they are really shopping their Saab Gripen because it is a big industry for them. Saab Industries is huge. And integrating with the Swedish system, okay, it's a proprietary system is the downside to it, that it's exclusive pretty much to Sweden, but more and more partners are coming in, for Sweden, and I have a hunch you're going to see more Saab Gripens in the future. Say another 10 years down the road, you're going to see way more of those than you're going to see of F-35s, due to cost, due to just political instability of the United States. People are now afraid to buy the F-35 since Donald Trump made that comment of shutting them off in flight. You know what I mean? It's even made us question, like Canada, we're building the Type 26 super destroyer right now, known as the River class. And it was supposed to get Raytheon technology in it for fire control systems and all that. Now we have to say, okay, well, maybe we need to start talking to the Brits with the BAE or Saab. But if we're going to do a Saab Gripen deal, let's just do everything Saab Gripen. What I would say is, okay, let's, and it's not to go all in on one country. We've already done that with the United States. The backfire is when you rely on them for the parts. Look, Canada can build labs. We build them here, but we can't build anything else. Of course we can. What we have done is we have agreed not to compete with the United States industry, particularly the military industry. That's why we don't build our own fighters. We don't build all it. But Saab is offering us a natural plant here. The South Koreans are offering us you want to build get the K9 mobile artillery, mobile artillery, or the rocket, the rocket truck. You want those things. Okay, not only will we sell them to you, but we're going to do one better. We're going to set up shop in your country. You'll build them in there, and it gets your industry growing. We're going to, interpartner our industries, which I'm all for that. Even with the United States, I'm all for that. But we should make that a part. It's the same with the auto industry and all that. Being intertwined and, you make this, I make that. The problem with globalism is the idea of taking one product and building, okay, you want a Harley Davidson, great. Okay, you're going to get the engine from Detroit. You're going to get the chassis from Canada. You're going to get the front end from Mexico. You're going to get the wire harness from Indonesia. I remember reading an article, all the different countries involved in building a freaking Harley Davidson. You know what I mean? And yeah, we do build them here. But it's okay, the wire harness is built in Singapore. Why? Oh, well, because we get a better deal on the wire harnesses. Well, we probably did at one point, but it's really hard to make the argument now to build like that, where I get all the partnerships and all that, and it's good and it's great, but the problem is it's not cheaper. It is cheaper to build 100% in your country. It is just more expensive to set up the industries to do it. That's where Canada is really in the chokehold, is that we don't have the since the fall of the Avro era, we haven't had a fighter line, other than the F-18 and maybe some F-5s that we might have finished up here or built up here. That was the last aircraft. The Voodoos, I don't think we built them in Canada. I think we bought them from the States. But let's go back to the Cold War with mixed fleet. Okay, so you got to phase out the F-18s, right? Fine. But what did the F-18s phase out? Well, we got the most advanced fighters at the time, which was the F-18 multi-role fighter, and it was going to replace 600 almost 700 Voodoos and almost 700 CF-100s, right? So that's nearly 1,400 aircraft that Canada had. Yeah, 1,400. Yeah, on top of the 350 starfighters, on top of the 1,800 F-86 Sabres, whatever we had left running around, flying around with those, right? and we replaced it with 140 CF-18s. So I'm not saying the 140 CF-18s weren't better airplanes. They were. They're clearly better. But like, are we going to replace our remaining 60 to 97 CF-18s with 16 F-35s? Is that going to be our entire Air Force? No matter how good of an aircraft you have, no, you're going to lose those aircraft early on. You need numbers. So it looks like where the discrepancy with the Saab Gripen is, are we going to be building these aircraft in this country, or are we going with the IKEA model where they're going to send us the parts and we assemble them here? Well, if we have to start with assembly, that's fine. It'll give us time to build a factory to build. Saab could just build the parts, and again, we can build it here, and then maybe after like 6 months, okay, we're building like say 20% of the parts here, and maybe after 3 years we're 100% building them here with upgrades or whatever, and have the service station, have everything we want, and while we're doing that, start building all the weaponry components and everything logistically that we would need to support it. The same way the Germans do with their equipment, the same way the Swedes do with their equipment, the same way the French do with their equipment, the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, I already said the French. But these are the only countries that are, South Korea, that build all their own equipment. So we live in a world that's too unstable to rely on a weapons partner. You can do trade some of that, but as we see, you're manipulating our elections and stuff like that with your commercials. That's tampering in our politics, even though our president endorsed one of our guys so to guarantee he would lose, right? But let's talk about interfering with elections, which I agree. Doug Ford shouldn't have put those ads out. The premier in BC is kind of pulled back on that, but there is, like, Doug Ford has a plan that you might not like, but he's going to maximize on the chaos of the trade war, right? And Carney's doing the same thing. The Swedes are trying to get in there. Now, mind you, Carney could be playing the Swedes as well to try to get a better deal out of the F-35. It's politics. People use each other. Politics is dirty. So maybe all this posturing we see that there will never be a Gripen deal, and it's just, okay, well, like what Carney might be waiting for is for Donald Trump to take his flip out and go, okay, that's it, I'm cutting off all your weapons industry with us. You can't buy any more of our equipment or get parts or anything like that. And Carney's, oh, no, don't do that. Well, how about this? If you gave us this deal, Trump will say, well, that's the best deal ever. Okay, and I'll do it, right? Because that's the way Trump is. Whether you like him or don't like him, it's the way he is, right? If he looks at it as a win, that's all you got to sell him on, is the idea of a win. That's why most of Trump, like, he doesn't do policy per se. He does rhetoric. He does executive order, which is ruled by fiat, but he doesn't really do the cross the T's, dot the I's policy. Carney does, right? But the world's learning that a deal, when you make a deal with Canada, a deal's a deal. I'm not saying perfectly, but most of the time, most people trust that trade deals with Canada. But the United States, their word doesn't mean anything right now because of what Donald Trump has done, betraying the trust of the people. I've already covered in the Carney-Trump report card. But he's betrayed the trust of the people, but he's also, around the world, nobody wants to do a trade deal with the United States unless they necessarily have to, because they don't know if Trump's going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed and say, okay, that deal's off, or you're not honoring the deal because I feel it should be changed today. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of that, and then there's just the BS in between, and the truth, the spin, all that. But when we get back to it, yes, the Gripen will be a political statement should we take it, and not only will it be a political statement, but it's also going to be something that is a major change for the Canadian military. Meaning we have to relearn a whole new system. So let's go back to the Avro Arrow. Again, I've talked about how the fall of the Avro Arrow is why we're in the predicament we're in now. Not solely because of that, but because of those practices where Canada would just say, okay, well, the United States is our best friend, so we're going to give them full access to our market to the point where we're going to allow American corporations and businesses to even outdo our own, and we won't compete with them. And we'll buy their stuff. We'll get a good deal on it. They'll get a good deal. They'll be able to build their industries, and we get we get a bit of an easier ride, right? Because we don't have to develop everything. But then when you get a guy like Trump in there, you realize, oh shit, we got to start making stuff, right? The Swedes figured this out, self-reliance, a long time ago. Yes, the Swedes have their problems. Don't get me wrong. Love them, but they've got issues. I don't, you know what I mean. Every nation does. Canada's got its issues. The States got its issues. Whatever. But what I'm getting at is that the Swedes knew that if the Russians ever did come across the Baltics, they had to be ready for them. So if you look at Swedish equipment, the CV-90 would be an excellent choice for Canada. Stephen Harper was going to buy CV-90 tanks and stuff like that because it's a whole system. Everything, like I say, like it's all, it's a whole system. Like the Canadian system is, most of our equipment can be broken into 3 categories. American stuff. So we canceled the Avro Aero, which God knows what that thing, the Avro Aero 2.0 would have looked like. Like Gen 1 Avro, the Avro Aero was a Gen 3 aircraft, okay? But Avro Aero Gen 4, Avro Aero Gen 5 would be stealth. Who knows? And this is still possible, resurrecting a new Avro Aero. It wouldn't look like the one in 1959, but here's what the Saab Gripen does. It